Hello and welcome, everybody. So, my name is Stephen Fortuna, and this is the show where we bring together HR experts to break down some of the most fundamental topics in the industry. Today, we're going to be covering workplace culture, which is such a huge topic, which is why I'm so glad we have three amazing panelists with us today. I'm going to go ahead and intro each of them right now. We've got Sarah Marchese, who is an HR manager at First Place AZ. We've got Tanner Pierce with us as well, who is an HR generalist at Pierce Services. And last but not least, we have HR director Chris Everett as well joining us. Thank you guys for being here. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right into the topic. And a fun place to always start is a good old fashioned definition. I think it's especially tricky with culture because it's not this tangible thing. So I really want to get multiple thoughts here. What actually is workplace culture? And maybe we could start, Chris, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts. What is culture in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stephen. So for me, and what I think has kind of worked best is to think about it as not a building, think about it as a living, breathing person, a living, breathing thing. So it's basically kind of the heart and soul of your organization, maybe the personality of your organization, but it's kind of what pulls everything together. And so that's kind of the way that I think about culture. And I think it's really important to have that kind of base for your company to grow.
Yeah, love that talk around just living and breathing, brings everything together. Tanner or Sarah, what thoughts do you have on this question? How do you define
Yeah.
workplace culture?
I think Chris summed it up really well, but it's kind of adds that it really like the way I like to see it is the lifeblood of the company, kind of or like the pulse, kind of the heart of the company, because it's a cliche thing to say, but a company is what its employees are, and the culture is made up of the employees, those personalities, those backgrounds, and so the most basic form, I'd say that's what culture is.
Yeah. Sarah,
Right.
anything?
And,
Go ahead.
yeah. And Tanner just said the personalities. So is the culture giving you a place that you feel good going into every day and coming home from every day?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like as much it's the feeling that the employees have too about their workplace.
Absolutely.
Um, so is there such a thing as, or what's really the difference between a bad culture and a good culture? Maybe we can get some examples here. Just and I'm thinking specifically, there's probably some people listening like, oh, okay, like I'm thinking about my workplace now. I'm thinking about how we all feel. Are we doing good or bad on culture? Sarah, and then maybe Tanner, you guys could share your thoughts on that. What's the difference between good and bad culture?
So again, it really does go back to how do you feel at the end of the day? Do you feel like you are able to bring your best? Do you feel like your skills and knowledge and expertise are being utilized to the full advantage? And if they're not being utilized to the full advantage, then how are you able and how are you contributing to that development? And I think of a culture that I know of where they do invest in one portion of their business, but not the other portions of the business. And I hope that makes sense because I don't want to be too detailed. And then, a good culture is one where everybody is able to come together with their separate, again, going back off of what Tanner said, their separate personalities and their individuality. It kind of falls into DEI, right? Like what do we each bring? What are we each celebrating differences in each other and bringing that as a whole?
Yeah. No, I love what Sarah had to say about does your culture kind of enhance your strengths or what you bring to the table? Because I think it's important to remember when it comes to the culture, it doesn't mean that you're all the same. That you all go to work, that you all you work hard and you show up on time, things like that. Yeah, of course, those are characteristics maybe that you want of your employees, but I think that's important to remember with culture. is that you acknowledge those differences and you magnify them. And so I think that's, for me, that's one good, or one thing of a good culture is you're not trying to change people, but you're building upon those things. Which is why it's so important when you hear about hiring for a culture fit. Is, you're looking at, okay, what do they bring to the table? What are those strengths that will make our team that much better? And then on the flip side, I think of a bad culture is one that minimizes people, or one that belittles people, one where people don't feel like they can add value, and they don't feel, and there's a lot of things that can go into that, whether there's lack of trust from leaders or just not comfortable. There's a lot of things that go into that, but I think in simple terms, it's when they feel belittled or feel like they can't add value or make a contribution to the team.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Chris, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. I also want to kind of share like a concrete example here. So let's say Amazon, for example. I think everyone knows Amazon.
So.
And then your local movie theater, let's say, is another example. So two completely different cultures. The movie theater is maybe more laid back, relaxing, having a good time. It's entertainment focused. And then Amazon has this reputation as being really efficient and really hardworking, maybe like overly hardworking. Do you think one of those is bad or one of those is good? I'm just trying to think more about like what this difference is.
No, I don't think one is bad or one is good, because when you're revising your culture or you're building your culture, everybody starts out, it could be entrepreneurial, it could be very caring. There's different types of cultures. So I don't think one is bad and the other is good. I think that if you have to have a plan when you're pulling your culture together, because otherwise you're kind of driving with one hand over the eye, and you're like, oh, I can see everything over here, but I can't see anything over there. So you have to have plans. It has to be intentional, but you should not like kind of copy other cultures. You have to make your own culture, and they have totally separate things. And I think that works well if that works well for the business and for the employees that are there. So
yeah. Let's talk about the why a little bit more, and like the benefits of investing in culture and really like figuring out this topic and how it applies to your business. Because I feel like there's probably a lot of people who will be listening or watching, either senior leaders or HR professionals, and they're thinking, like, we don't have extra money or effort to put into extra initiatives right now. We really have to prioritize. So I'd love to hear from everyone, like, what's your best case? Give me your best like pitch to a business owner as to why they should be investing in their culture and thinking about it more seriously. Tanner, I think maybe you've got a thought. I'm looking at your face right now.
Or was that a question?
Yeah, I got some thoughts. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind to me, we all talked about it, how culture is made up of people. And so in simple terms, the way I put it, if you're not investing in culture, you're not investing in your employees. I think that's just a simple way to put it, which again, that seems kind of like a cop out, like, oh, you're just saying that like to make me feel bad about not wanting to spend money on HR. but that's just the reality of it. Like, a culture is all about creating an environment that employees feel safe and comfortable. And so if you're not investing into creating that culture, and again, I like what Chris said, there's not a good way. I don't want to say, yes, there is a good and bad way of culture, but there's not necessarily a right or wrong way. Like in Amazon and the movie theater, totally two different companies, but they could have two entirely different cultures that are both good cultures. And so I think that's important to remember, that what do you want your culture to look like? There's not a cookie cutter way of what a culture needs to be. And then kind of going out and investing in that. And then ultimately, when it comes to culture, you have to have buy-in from your leaders, because they're the ones that are going to create that culture. I know people oftentimes want to put it on HR and, culture committee, things like that companies have, which, yes, they play a role. But in reality, if leaders don't have that buy-in and they don't want to instill that culture, it's not going to happen. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if that's kind of all over the place, but.
Well, no, I mean, you brought home the importance of getting leadership on board and making them realize how important it is. And like you said, if you're not investing in culture, you're not investing in employees. So that's a great case to begin with culture. Sarah or Chris, what thoughts do you have on this? I mean, is this, I'm the CFO now. I'm thinking, man, do we really need to invest in this stuff? Do we need to pay somebody to think about it?
Well, let's talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. Okay. So the extrinsic motivators are going to come from the company itself, right? We pay this much above our competitors, or this is how we're comparable. These are the benefits we offer. These are the perks that we offer. Here's your PTO time. The intrinsic motivators are just, those can't be controlled by the company. So at the end of the day, if the company knows that what they are offering is, within their means, number one, financially, because you're the CFO, okay, if it's within your means and you can show how it's benefiting everybody, not just a certain group of people, everybody, then there you go right there. Because somebody's going to either appreciate or not appreciate what's being offered. And again, it just goes back to the first part about good and bad culture. What resonates with them? What do they need? And we have to make that decision on our own, even as HR professionals, as we job search. We have to look at job descriptions as we're applying and decide, is that for me? Is that going to motivate me, and does that meet what I need? So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, anything you want to add on this topic?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I totally agree with both what Tanner and Sarah said. And, my approach would be, because I'm in leadership, but I also report to leadership, I look at the way that I approach them is, how does this affect not only the employees, but our relationships with our customers, our clients, everybody else that's out there. So if we take care of our employees internally, that's going to have a huge impact on production, on motivation, on retention. We don't want employees leaving. So the whole thing kind of is a domino effect. If you start out with your employees, they're your base, right? They're your forward facing to your customers, to your clients, and all of that. So to me, it's an easy sell, and it doesn't always involve dollars. It's involving developing internal processes. Does that make sense?
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. It's just going to trickle across the whole organization.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I think we've established really well the kind of the what of culture and the why. I want to spend the majority of the rest of our conversation on the how. How do we actually get started? Sure, the first topic I have around this is I've heard it said by some people that culture is discovered more than it's built. And I think each of you have kind of hinted at this a little bit, that, it depends on the people in the organization. It should be, what they bring. They are the culture and all this. But Chris, maybe you could start us off on this one. Do you agree with that? How do you find the culture that should exist in an organization? Do you discover it? Is it designed in like a lab, and then you roll it out?
Right. So yeah, well, it can be. So when you join a new organization, I mean, especially somebody in the HR profession, you're kind of doing this observation, right? You're looking at what's happening in place. You look at how many people have stayed, how many people have left, what's the overall feel of the organization, and where do we go from there? And the way that we would go from there would be, I'm a big data fan, metrics, right? We want to try and get some feedback from leadership, from the employees that are there. So as far as like the beginnings or looking at that, it's very easy for a culture to just kind of develop itself, and not in a good way necessarily. Yeah. So it leads back to like, hand over there, and I kind of know what's going on. So you do have to have some intention there to get things started. You do have to have the feedback process to know what's currently going on, what's working, what's not working, before you can kind of decide, do we need to change the culture? Do we need to totally change everything? Do we need to make little differences in there? So the first piece is always to be observational and a little bit transactional, see what's going on within the company before you can make any decisions.
I think that it can be definitely thought out and built, not just strictly developed. And a perfect example of that I have is I had worked for a small company a few years ago where the owner and the founder of the company, she actually built up that company off of her own experiences in work-life balance, where she had spent years and years working for other companies that did not value her time away from work. She missed kids' dance recitals, certain aspects, because she had to be available for the client at like all the time. And so when she started her company and started hiring employees, that was actually her motto, was like, hey, if you want to go hiking at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday and you don't have like something that's super pressing, go, because that is for your well-being, right? And she was very flexible too. She was like, hey, if you need to go attend a school, a parent teacher conference or whatever, please be sure to block out that time and then just come back to it later, as you need. She did not care what you were doing and when you were doing it, as long as it was getting done and ultimately the client's needs were getting met. Bottom line. So it can work both ways. It just depends on the nature of your business, but also how you can manage your own time.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree with what both of them said. I agree it can either be developed or built. I think again, it's just like I think I said before, culture. There's not a cookie cutter way to do it. It really a lot like I said, it starts with leadership, and so a lot of it is okay. How are you gonna, what do you want to accomplish? What's kind of like your end goal culture wise, and then what are you gonna do to get there? And there are gonna be, every company's gonna have its own little preferences on what they want that culture to look like. And so with developing that, you're probably gonna set some goals, and you're gonna. Again, you're not going to try to create a culture where you're changing the people like, oh, we want this kind of culture. So you need to start thinking this way. We're going to fire you because you don't do this or this,
Right.
That's the hard part when you're changing culture is kind of, you probably already have a current culture in place and you have certain employees that, are part of that culture, but trying to make it the way you want it to be and kind of instilling that, building upon what you already have.
Yeah. Well, the different models here are really interesting because that example Shara shared, really like, this is a new company and we can start fresh, bring
Absolutely.
and I'm going to hire the people who want to live in this work-life balance, which is probably most people, but anyways,
right.
versus kind of that original, what Chris was sharing around, go in and you have established employees and there already is a culture there technically, and you're observing and then figuring out how to tweak and how to improve. In that second option, it probably takes a lot of time, I'm imagining, really trying to change a culture.
Not necessarily though. It isn't necessary unless you're going into something that's a complete disaster and it's an obvious disaster, right? Because I'm very careful with the word culture fit, because I think that's not a good thing to say. So you just kind of do the observation and you can make things, I think you can do it in a way to make things better.
Yeah.
And that's the safe way to do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that now. Let's talk about improving culture or creating culture. Let's say you've done your kind of observation, or you've done kind of your thinking around, what the ideal culture should be in an organization. How do you now go and build that? How do you make that culture a reality? Maybe there's some tactics or some documents you should be writing, or like whatever. I want to hear all your ideas. Maybe Tanner, you can start us off, and then we'll kind of go around. And how do we roll out this culture?
Yeah, I think, I know I keep saying this, but again, it starts with the leadership. So come up with an action plan. I know I think a lot of companies do this, but I remember one company in particular I used to work with where, the beginning of the year, they had an awesome culture. And so at the beginning of the year, they have, your goal setting, what each department, what goals they're going to set. And all of it was always based off of those core values, the goals that as a company, what they wanted to accomplish culture-wise, everything that they did was. And so I think if you really want to make a change, culture wise, or really implement a culture, like we were talking about before, being intentional about it. I think it was Chris who said it, where if we just kind of want a culture to change, like, oh yeah, we want to accomplish this, and you don't really do anything, or you just kind of, oh, let's go with the flow and see what happens with our culture.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, we all want work-life balance. Okay, we'll see what happens. It's
Right.
probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so being is very intentional, having like an actual action plan, and then goals. Because of course, as a company, you're still making sure you're trying to take care of your clients. You
Right.
still know whether you're selling a product, whatever the case is. You still obviously have what you're doing as a company, but behind that, everything that you should do goal wise, you should be aware of what kind of impact is that going to have on your company culture. Like again, that company I talked about before, I remember early on, this is long before I worked with them, but they kind of made that conscious decision where they were going to be, work-life balance, 8 to 5, that's when we work, and maybe we might miss out on some business opportunities and things like that, and not be quote unquote as profitable financially. But they were totally okay with that because they know they were creating a culture where their employees know that, okay, this is when I'm working. If I need to take time off here or there, I can do that. And again, every company is going to be different, but that was just for me one prime example where they had a financial goal in mind, I'm sure, but they were aware of the culture that they wanted to have and the impact their financial goal would have on their culture or vice versa.
Yeah.
So
And leadership setting concrete goals, it sounds like. For others.
There's a trickle down effect. I think again, they're the ones that set those goals, and if they don't set those goals, then most employees, they're just going to follow what their managers tell them to do. And so if they're not, if the leadership doesn't have those goals, then the employees are just going to keep doing their work, and there's not really going to be much of a culture.
Yeah. Chris, what would you add to this? How would you roll out a culture change or a culture throughout an organization?
I love what Tanner said because it truly does. Being intentional means it starts from the leadership down. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of sitting there, and it doesn't have to be at the beginning of the year. It can be at any point where leadership has that meeting and that discussion with the team about communication. How are we running our business? How are we, talking to the employees? How do you feel? Do you feel, happy about being here? And then making sure that everybody's on the same page and also getting feedback from the employees. So having that open discussion, which not every leader feels comfortable doing. That's a really big move for them. But having those open discussions so that everybody's on the same page is one way to do that. And then you can go on with maybe eventually some kind of written format or things of that nature. But it's the communication. It starts with that. And if you don't have regular communication with the employees, a piece of paper isn't going to change anything. So yeah, Tanner's idea was fabulous. So that's the beginning.
Yeah. Sarah, what about you? What are you thinking over there?
Yeah, well, it is getting leadership right, and them understanding their own expectations and delving deep into that. And a part of that, I think, should be, does leadership truly understand what goes on the other end? Do they, do they understand what their frontline employees are faced with every day? Mm-hmm. So, for it, I'll pick on Amazon just to follow your lead. Does Jeff Bezos understand what his warehouse workers have to do and what they have to, the expectations they have to meet every day, right? Does he know what the drivers have to go through and what they have to meet, So, I mean, because we have expectations. If I'm an Amazon employee, I have expectations of him, and he may not know that, right? But, and that's fine. But does he understand what has to happen here? So it does follow into that trickle down effect,
Mm-hmm.
Are their expectations being understood and stated clearly?
Yeah. So it sounds like a great launching point. It's just getting that empathy, getting the leader to have the empathy for the other employees.
Yeah, or getting in the weeds. You remember that show
Right.
where the owner would go and pretend he
Undercover
was one of
boss.
the employees?
I was
Yeah.
thinking of that.
Yeah, but it's
I love
true,
that show.
right?
Yeah.
It's true because they really don't have any idea unless they started out that way in the business. And sometimes that happens
Right.
where they started out right on the ground, but that's not true in most cases. So
Right.
I love what Sarah said. That's great.
Yeah. And I think leadership becomes so powerful too when they start to show an example. Like they're around the employees now and they start to act the way that they want the culture to be.
That's right.
And then everyone else kind of falls in line and sees it and hey, like he's working extra or he's taking vacation right now or
Yes.
whatever. I know those have been impactful moments for me personally and kind of reinforcing cultures when I see leaders fall through. Man, I'm just thinking about other workplaces too that I've been at, and it seems like there's always some core values written down, posted around the office somewhere. Like you've got some
Nobody
stickers
reads.
on them. Yeah, I know.
Right.
Well, it's funny
Are
because
they
it's
actually following them?
yeah, it's like a cheesy kind of a concept. I think to like write down, okay, these are the 5 core values.
Yeah.
But then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, like if leadership gets up and gets excited about them and is talking about, like, hey, transparency is this, and so we're going to tell you this in this meeting or whatever, you kind of become a part of the cult, if you will. Not really, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, better like what is it, Yoda, and not tell but do. So you can
Yeah.
have all that up there, and if you're not doing it, then they're just words, right?
Yep.
And people become disengaged, you know, and they don't there's no power there whatsoever. And as a leader, you can have the right power, right? That's not, you know, to be able to get your team to be on, you know, all together working together. So yeah, words and paper don't mean a lot to me, and that sounds weird coming from HR, but you know, it just
Yeah.
you know, communication.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit now around, you know, I'm just kind of following the timeline here, and you figured out the culture you want, starting to roll it out, you're being a good leader about it. How do you know if the culture that if you're successful, basically? How do you come back and measure, like, so like, did we make a difference? Is the culture helping or not?
Depends on
I think
who
this
you
kind of
ask.
goes back. Sorry, go ahead, Tanner.
I was just saying, it just depends on who you ask.
Depends on you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the easy
Yeah.
way out. Right?
Yeah.
Chris, I know earlier you were talking about this observation phase, really trying to understand
Yeah.
what a
Right.
like measuring the culture. I mean, are there metrics that go into that? Is it just a survey? What things would you look at? And then maybe Sarah, you could pop in as well and share.
Yeah, there's a lot
share
of
your
things. Obviously, there's surveys. I mean, you get surveys. You can have meetings. You can have one-on-one. You can have pulse surveys. You know, you can talk to the employees. But observations says a lot, right? Because sometimes people will say one thing to you, but if you just stand there and observe and spend time with different areas and different departments, you can really see whether the culture is working. So yes, data is important. You know, we used to do not only a regular survey, but we would do pulse surveys. And my goal was I kind of asked the same questions every couple of months to see, did anything shift? Did anything change? But the real indicator to me is just watching what's going on. Are people staying? Are they happy? Is there production?
Yeah.
You know, that's the real, because, you know, when you give a survey, even if it's anonymous, are you getting the real information?
Yeah.
Maybe not. So that's the way I do that. And I make sure that I'm very close to leadership and make sure that they are on the same page. Am I seeing changes or am I seeing positivity from them? Because they're more accountable, I think, than anybody else, than the employees. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to figure out what's going on with your employees without them feeling like they're being spotlighted. You know, oh no, here comes HR. They're going to ask me a question.
Yeah.
No, it's exactly what Chris took the words right from me. It's exactly all of that. Are you gathering transparent information? Are you allowing that transparency? But then also, are you looking at your recruitment and retention numbers? Are you getting the applicants that you want and need? Are you following through with those people and making the best decision Are they able to come into work and be productive because they feel like they can be? So yes, exactly what they both said.
Yeah. I think you hit on a benefit of culture that I don't think we really addressed yet, which is like your talent pool gets bigger if you have a good culture. People want to work for you. Hopefully, there's some metrics in
Yeah.
your recruiting efforts that are going to go way up.
Right.
So that's an interesting area to watch as well. Tanner, do you have any other thoughts on this topic of measuring culture?
I agree with what Chris and Sarah both said. One thought that comes to mind to me when you see on LinkedIn and when you're applying for jobs, everyone's always talking about, oh, we've got a great culture or our culture's good. You know, they're always, which I get that. I mean, you're trying to stand out, and I totally get that. I think for me, a great way to measure it kind of when I think about HR, a few things, with culture is, what talent are you attracting? Are you developing that talent? And then are you retaining that talent? And again, it is hard to keep track of all that, like what Chris and Sarah is saying. Like, yes, there's metrics that you do the best you can, whether it's surveys or your employee retention rate, and it's never going to be an exact science of measuring all three of those things. But I think, at least from an HR perspective, when it comes to, or is your culture successful, is looking at those three different things, and developing, that's not just, oh, are we promoting employees, but are they developing, are they developing their talents when they get more responsibility, like how are we making them better from when they come in to when they leave or when they get a promotion,
Yes.
And so I like to kind of break it down because those are three different phases of the employee cycle that you can look to see kind of how culture is.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Tanner just said, because that's the reason people leave. It's in that initial gap where there's no progression.
Mhm.
You signed up, you do your job, and you get your review once a year, but where is the progression with the employee? And that's one of the reasons that people leave. And also putting your culture out there. So as Tanner said, yes, it's on LinkedIn. We have a great culture. Can I go on your website? Can you tell me what your culture is? Tell me about it. And it may not be there. So just again, words, I want to see it.
Well, and just to kind of enhance what Chris said, progression does not mean title changes or promotions necessarily. It can mean, are you seeing a progression in your pay? Are you seeing a progression in your development? It does not have to be about titles.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Just them growing as a person and feeling
right.
Having that part of the job being meaningful. Well, awesome. I think this has been really helpful for people on kind of the measuring piece, and hopefully that gives them some concrete ways to approach leadership, like we said, and say, hey, if we invest in culture, this is what we could see happen, and this is how we'll follow the results down the row. I want to address a common kind of fear or potential mistake that happens in a lot of these culture exercises, which we've already alluded to, I think, quite a bit throughout. But when does a strong culture and culture fit and some of these other topics become discrimination, right? So how do you make like a great place like a place where a particular kind of person wants to work, but not discriminate against people who may be different ethnicities, genders, or whatever, and have that creep in? Sarah, do you want to start us off on that one? How do we not let culture become a discriminatory factor?
Well, this is where I think that the whole space and focus of DE&I is becoming very, very important in the workplace, because, like you said, companies, and Chris said it earlier too, companies are focusing, or they were focusing too much on fit, right? Like, oh, are they cohesive? Like, could we all go out and get a drink after work? That kind of thought and feeling. And really, it's celebrating our differences. I mean, just because, Julie does not want to go get a drink with her coworkers after work, it doesn't mean she doesn't like them. She might have something else going on after work that she's committed to, or she might be shy. She might be introverted, or maybe she doesn't drink. Maybe she's an alcoholic and she has to, not put herself in that environment. I mean, there could be any reason, right? And so I think it's just important that we not focus on personality, so the outward personality so much, but focus on, what are we all collectively bringing to the table.
Yeah, I think that's great, Sarah. Hannah or Chris, any of you want to jump in and share any additional insights on avoiding this mistake?
Yeah, I mean, the mistake often starts from the beginning, although that can happen within an organization. But when we talked about recruiting and going out there, and I said earlier, I don't like the word culture fit, it's culture add. Because as if anybody's done recruiting, it's really easy to get into that halo effect. Oh, I can be friends with this person. I like their personality. I see them being part of us. So if you want to learn more about the people that you're bringing on board, you have to see beyond that, because you have to think of it this way. You can't control the first thought that pops into your head, right? When you see somebody's picture or you see their resume, it's really, really hard to do that. So you have to get beyond that, and you need input from other people when you're bringing people on board. But there's other ways to see what their skill set is. You can do testing, you can do different things. So we need to move away from that word and think about a different way to add to the culture, like I said, and not just seeing if you fit. Fit's not a good word.
Yeah. I heard a funny, I wish I remember this person's name on the top of my head, but if I could shout them out. But their thought was basically, you can't figure out in a couple interviews what somebody's culture even is. Or what
Of course.
It's so opaque. So like, you're going to base a hiring decision off of something you actually have a very poor signal on.
Yeah.
I mean, you're wrong anyways. So like, don't be hyper focused on it. But Tanner, I know you have some thoughts too. What do you think about this?
Yeah, well, first, I'll be honest, this is something that not say struggled with, but I've thought a lot of and like trying to wrap my head around it. So I really appreciate Chris and Sarah, both your thoughts on it. I think the two things that really stood out to me is, and I think we've all kind of mentioned it, but not trying to change the employee and kind of enhancing what they bring to the table and kind of focusing on that. I like what Chris means. This is cold reality, like she said, of, when we see someone's resume or we see their LinkedIn profile, we already have an immediate judgment of who they are or the kind of person they are. And then, like you said, Steven, even after a couple interviews, you don't know if someone's a culture fit. Yeah, like Chris was saying, there's that halo effect where, I could go out to lunch with them. They would be so much fun. I could be friends with them, which, of course we want friends at work, but, when you're interviewing and hiring people that are a culture fit, you got to dig a little deeper than, they would get along with the team. Again, yes, you want them to get along with the team, but it's diving a little deeper, which is a lot harder or a lot easier said than done. But driving a little deeper to see, okay, what are they going to add to our culture? What are they going to enhance? Are we going to be able to, not enhance their strengths, but kind of magnify their strengths, or what are they going to bring to the table?
Yeah. Well, we have one more major question I want to address really quickly, and we'll probably go pretty quick on it. And then we always like to give everyone one last opportunity to share kind of their last piece of wisdom or advice in kind of a short sentence. So the first question, though, is around leadership. We talk a lot about leadership. Leadership needs to lead with culture. They need to set the example. They need to talk about it. They need to understand it. And so I'm thinking about like in an entry level. They're really like in an entry level role, and they are not leadership, right? So this HR person is not actually in leadership. What is HR's role in all this? Are they just supposed to go and inspire leadership to make these changes themselves, or what really is the HR department's role? Maybe Sarah, if you have any thoughts, and Tanner as well, jumping over.
I think HR has to really walk that line, right? Because there is an expectation of HR from leadership to carry out certain responsibilities, and we have to have our face on, right? Like a coworker of mine and I were talking about how do people, when they have like when they're in a leadership role and they have stuff going on in their life, how do they hide that? How do they put on that face? And I think that's where HR has to kind of stand in. But on the flip side, like we are the receiver of information from those frontline employees, and we have to be able to relay that to our leadership in a way that they're going to understand it and accept it.
Yeah, that's really well said. It's like, presenting that information to leadership, you're going to be the best source of that for them to get some of these cultures speaking. Tanner, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Sarah said. I mean, in reality, yes, you're there to represent the company, but in reality, you're an advocate for the employees. A lot of those employees don't get a chance to let the leadership know of how they feel, what they're going through, their struggles, things like that. And I think a lot of that can fall on HR, is being that advocate for the employee, which is why they can play such a big role in company culture. Because again, yes, the leadership, it starts with leadership and instilling that. But as with HR, being advocate for the employees, you probably have a better idea than anyone on what the culture is currently, and then maybe what it should be.
Yeah. Great clarifications there. We're about out of time here, so I want to move on to our final closing thoughts from everybody. Again, the question here is, really imagine those people in your mind. They're thinking about culture for the first time. Maybe they've gone into a bad culture and they're trying to figure out how to change it, or they're starting a culture fresh, whatever it may be. But this is their first time trying to improve or build a workplace culture. So what kind of final piece of wisdom do you have for them in just a sentence or maybe 2 sentences? This is like your mic drop moment, right? This is slam dunk. So no pressure at all. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. No pressure at all. But maybe Chris, we could start with you, and then we can work back. Tanner, and then Sarah, we'll give the last word to you.
Okay. I don't know about a mic drop moment, but if you're talking about somebody entry level in HR, and we've all been there, the thing that I think is helpful first is, like you had just said, Stephen, think about your past personal experiences and the different companies that you work for. And I used to kind of jot down notes. Like, so if I went to another company, I'd say, well, I don't want to be in this kind of company. And I know I don't want to do this. And that's how I got my thoughts together when I was new to the field, because, you have to sit down and think about, well, how did I feel at different organizations? What worked there? What didn't work there? And that's a starting point, so that you have some kind of building block to say, okay, what do I think is best for the employees? And also you can look at other cultures. The information is out there, and kind of pull bits and pieces from that to try and get things together. And then, you don't know when you get hired what leadership is really about, no matter what kind of face they put on when you interview. Yeah, that's a face. So you go from that point and just kind of, you got to build up your courage, right? To sit there and speak, because you're serving two masters, right? You're serving the company and you're serving the employees as well. So you got to build courage when you're in the HR field.
Love it. Tanner, last piece of advice from you.
So real quick, this is advice regarding just HR and culture in general. Sorry, what's the question again?
Yeah. So somebody who's building or trying to improve culture of their organization for the first time, they're really new to this concept. What's like your fortune cookie advice for them?
So, let's see. That's a good question. I'd say, to kind of put it into simple terms, is you gain credibility based off of what you're able to accomplish, or based off your own actions. Kind of a simple way, leading by example. And so I think, especially if you're a one person HR team, that can be very intimidating. Of, okay, how am I going to instill that culture or get buy-in from leadership? And so I think for me is, again, going back to being that advocate for employees, knowing that, remembering that you represent the employees the best way you can, and then being the best example you can be to managers and employees. Because if they see that from the HR team, then that's gonna they'll have more buy-in.
Yeah. Awesome. Sarah, last word to you.
All right. Well, in honor of World Mental Health Day that was on the 10th, a recent LinkedIn post that I did and that received a lot of attention. But this applies to everybody because we are all culture contributors. Your mental health should not suffer because of a job.
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah.
There you go.
Don't stress out too much. I like it. Okay. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you three so much for being here. For the listeners and watchers, if you want to learn a little bit more about workplace culture, this conversation will actually be posted at the top of our HR Encyclopedia entry on the same topic. You're welcome to read that as well. We have tons of podcasts episodes on culture, and we're always improving the article. And little piece of advice for you is to connect with these three. They're awesome. They're very generous and kind, and it's always a privilege to hang out with them and learn from them. So I know they're all on LinkedIn. Yeah, thank you three so much for joining us, and we hope everyone has an amazing rest of their day.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, you guys as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.